So this will introduce Tinker to you, my fellow nerds, whom I love so much. Chapter 2. This day was seriously starting to suck. Tinker plopped down in the cafe chair and banged his knee on the metal bar under the tiny table. His wince of pain was masked by Hubble's aggravated growl as his DM screen flopped onto the table. "Hey now!" Hubble snatched up the screen. He rebent the creases of the modified folder so that it would continue to shield his pile of ragged-edged notebook papers from the rest of the table. I totally dated my DM. "Watch it, Tinkerton. There is sensitive material back here." "Deciphering launch codes again? I was only gone 5 minutes. "Nah," said Natalie. "Sam's dwarf tripped on a lever that opened a secret door in the passageway, and now Dungeon Master Hubble is rolling to answer like 50 questions that determine just how screwed we are." Sam leaned back in his chair and yawned at the ceiling. "Sorry guys, what can I say? I'm a clumsy dwarf. Didn't realize this was going to take forever." There was a clatter of dice, and Hubble giggled like a comic book villain from behind the screen. "I hope you like orcs." "I skewer them with my massive longsword!" cried Natalie. "Hold your horses, Leroy Jenkins," Hubble muttered. "We're not ready for that yet." Tinker could only, thank you for laughing.
Yes.
Tinker could only assume that we referred to Hubble and his newly formed legion of bloodthirsty orcs. "Well, hurry up so I can roll for an orc kebab." Natalie rubbed her hands together. "I'm still annoyed you canceled our rehearsal for this, but I'm feeling lucky. And speaking of lucky," she leaned over to Tinker and stage whispered, "Did you ask her?" Sam picked his head up and stared at his sister. "Subtle, Nat, real subtle." Natalie put a hand up to her ear. "What's that, narcoleptic?" she said. "I can't hear you. I think you're sleep talking again." "Geez, Nat." Sam rubbed his eyes with the back of his hands. "I am exhausted, though. Maybe I'll get a coffee." He nodded to Tinker's drink. "That looks good. What's that?" "It's, something you won't be having, bro," Natalie finished. "The last time you drank coffee before the full moon, you were incapacitated for a week." Sam stuck his tongue out at his little sister, but only because what she said was absolutely true. Sam was a weresloth. On top of that, small aside, several years ago before a panel when I was writing the short story that this character came from, I interviewed the audience and asked them what were the lamest people they could come up with, and sloth was one of them. So that was Dragon Con sourced right there. On top of being constantly tired during the full moon and after caffeine crashes, Sam turned into a sweet, furry, immovable lump. Sam and Natalie's family had recently moved from the Falls from some small town in Northern Virginia where, in December of 2012, everyone had shifted into a were-being of their totem animal. Everyone, that is, except a select few, including Natalie. Since she missed the magical boat, Natalie had become the one in charge of wrangling her wild family when they couldn't manage themselves, which also qualified her to be one of the rare plain old human students at Harmswood. Well, as plain old as any girl could be in 4-inch knee-high platform leather boots and black lipstick. She'd immediately teamed up with Hubble and his theater troupe, and it felt like she'd always been part of the school. In only a few months, Natalie fit in better among the paranormals at Harmswood than Tinker had the entire time he'd been there. "Go on," Tinker said to Sam. "I'm sure Bellamy would be happy to hook you up with a decaf." "Southern Belle is always happy," said Natalie. She glanced at Hubble, his silver gray head still bent over his dice as he scribbled calculations. She asked Tinker her question again, this time in an actual whisper. "So did you invite her to the masquerade or not?" "Sort of," he said. "Well, did she say yes?" "Sort of," he said again. Natalie sighed. "Tink sweets, I'm dying over here. You're gonna have to help me out. Give me a little more to go on." Tinker pinched the bridge of his nose and summoned all the patience he could muster. Natalie could be abrasive, but she was usually right, especially when it came to Tinker and his complete lack of confidence around girls. Scratch that, girl. One girl, Bellamy. It had always been Bellamy. He remembered the moment he'd first laid eyes on her, like a photograph frozen in his mind forever. She sat illuminated by the window of his 4th grade classroom. She'd been wearing a pink sundress, And with those gigantic wings and that head full of bouncy golden ringlets, when she turned to him, she'd given him that 1,000-watt smile that shone like the sun, and the rest of the horrible world just melted away. When most people laid eyes on Tinker, even back when he was a plump little greenling, they wrinkled their noses in confusion or disgust, as if he wore a sign that labeled him a slimy, sickly, bumpy, unwanted street rat. Paranormals and humans alike judged him and found him wanting before he ever spoke a word. Despite his scholarship, he'd had to work extra hard in every class and excel at every course of study before most of his teachers at Harmswood had taken him seriously. But not Bellamy. Bellamy believed the best of everyone until they proved her wrong, and even then she gave them a second chance. Years ago, that fairy girl had smiled at that goblin boy like she'd been waiting for him all morning and couldn't believe he'd finally arrived. It didn't matter that goblins were allergic to fairies. Didn't matter that goblins and fairies shouldn't be friends. Bellamy LaRousse could have been a golem made out of napalm and cyanide, and Tinker wouldn't have cared. He lost his heart forever that day. Lost and gone forever. Snap! Tinker focused on Natalie's fingers, mere inches from his face. Earth to Tink, you still with us? Sorry, he shook his head. What? What did she say exactly? Natalie said in her best William Shatner imitation. She's on the decorating committee with Kai, he answered. She doesn't need anyone to escort her to the masquerade because she'll already be there when the doors open. Natalie crossed her very long legs and folded her very long arms. Natalie didn't quite have Tinker's height, but she was definitely taller than Sam, especially in those shoes. Yeah, well, I can believe she said the first part, but I'm pretty sure you inferred the last bit. How could you know that? Because I'm way smarter than you or my brother will ever give me credit for. Now, what did Bellamy say exactly? Tinker bowed his head and mumbled, she asked if I would save her a dance, and I said I would. Natalie pursed her lips. She stared at Tinker, then over at the counter where Bellamy was finishing up Sam's drink, and then back at Tinker. I don't even know where to start. It's like you're both clueless. Tinker sighed. I know. Why don't you just, I don't know, walk up to her and tell her you love her? Because he's already done that. Hubble peered over the DM screen, squinting his piercing cobalt blue eyes. All the mind-dwelling kobolds possessed eyes like that same bright color. It was only a little unnerving. Glancing from Tinker to Natalie, Hubble went on. 6th grade, in which it was established that he loves her and she loves him. He recited the tidbit as if it were a historical fact from the textbook of Tinker's life. Natalie raised an eyebrow at him. So he should ask her to marry him? 8th grade, Tinker groaned, in which Tinker and Bellamy vowed that they would grow old together, and then there was this past summer. Tinker hung his head. During which Tinker finally confessed to his goblin mentor that he was in love with a fairy. What did your mentor say? Natalie asked incredulously. Were you, flogged or something for consorting with the enemy? He didn't say anything, Tinker said. I just changed the subject, so I didn't bring it. He changed the subject, so I didn't bring it up again. Wow, that's harsh. But, I guess it could have been worse. Natalie shook her head. So let me get this straight. Bellamy loves you and plans on spending the rest of her life with you, and you love her and thought about pretty much nothing else for years. But you guys aren't girlfriend and boyfriend. Goblins and fairies can't be friends, said Tinker. Never mind girlfriends and boyfriends. Star-crossed lovers, Hubble murmured over his dice. Tinker scowled at his roommate and so-called best friend. Kobolds were similar to goblins in many ways. Both races had reputations for being scavengers and hoarders. But if Hubble wanted to kiss a fey woman's hand, he would do so without breaking into swollen lips and hives. Natalie wasn't buying any of it. But you managed to be friends with her anyway, despite that stupid rule. Tinker could feel his cheeks burning. Thankfully, green-skinned goblins didn't blush much. Yes, we're just friends. Really good friends, even though we shouldn't be. More precisely, said Hubble. The girlfriend thing is the one question he's too chicken to ask her. Natalie reached out and smacked Tinker on the back of the head. Oh, and spilled water all over him. Stupid rules, smacked on the back of the head. He knew it was coming, but he knew he deserved it. Look, I'm just no good with this stuff. No good with girls? Hubble said, yeah, that's obvious. No good with feelings, muttered Tinker. It's not like I grew up with a family or anything. I was an orphan, abandoned as a baby on the streets, picked up and adopted by goblins. I have no clue how to express emotions like this. Oh, sweetie, I have news for you, said Natalie. People all over the world have no idea how to express themselves, even ones who did grow up in families. Isn't that right, Sam? Sam had returned to the table with not only a frosty beverage for himself, but also ones for Natalie and Hubble. Whatever she said, she's correct. Tinker had to hand it to Sam. He was a good brother. Natalie took a sip of the frozen chocolate and closed her eyes for a moment in bliss. I was telling Tink that he's not the only kid without the ability to properly communicate his feelings. You mean about Bellamy? Sam shrugged as he slid languidly down into his chair. Then I told him just kiss her. Natalie raised her glass to Sam. Brother, that may be the most intelligent thing I have ever heard you say. Granted, it might kill him or send him into anaphylactic shock, said Hubble. He rolled the dice again. The school nurse has a file on him thicker than the D&D player's handbook. Tinker had fantasized about kissing Bellamy 1,000,000 times. Not that he'd ever admit it to his friends. Every time he had died a happy man. She would leave flowers on his grave regularly and pine over the loss of him for the rest of her days. But he would never take that risk in real life. Never. He could never do that to Bellamy. Sam shrugged. Take a Benadryl. After another sip of her drink, Natalie reconsidered. It's possible she doesn't want your relationship to go beyond friendship. In that case, you should respect that. Tinker pointed at Natalie. Exactly. Well said. After you've asked her the girlfriend question, Natalie finished. Or just kiss her, Sam said around his straw. Tinker smirked. I'm not going to assault one of my best friends and ruin the rare and beautiful relationship we have. This time, Sam, Natalie, and Hubble all threw up their hands in unison. Hubble's DM screen flopped back down to the table. I'm seriously considering assaulting one of my best friends, Hubble said to Tinker as he repositioned the screen. Right after I crush his tiny little band of misfit adventurers with his horde of zombie orcs. Nice. Can my half-elf roll to fire an arrow at them through the secret door because they're taking so long to get ready, said Tinker. Dude, Sam snorted, they're teenage girl zombie orcs. Natalie kicked her brother's chair. Check yourself, fuzzbutt. I know where you sleep. Got it! Hubble clapped his hands together and rubbed them sinisterly. Gird your loins, gamers. You are so not ready for this. Adopting his most dramatic dungeon master voice, Hubble spoke. Seemingly out of nowhere, a legion of orcs begins to pour through the secret doorway. The electronic werewolf howled as the front door opened. The bell, the bells as the front door opens. Tinker and his tiny band of misfit adventurers all burst out laughing. Ranulph Tinkerton, a raspy voice called out. Tinker froze mid-laugh. He recognized that voice, but he hadn't expected to see its owner again until winter break. Slowly, he turned in his chair. Retcher? Yes, his goblin mentor really was there inside the coffee shop. 3 more of the Lost Boys stood with him, Snot, and the twins, Fork and Willie. I sourced those names off Facebook, too. How had they found him here in the Bean? And what on earth were they doing in Nocturne Falls? Goblins weren't allowed to leave Goblin City unless they had special dispensation from the Goblin King, like the one Tinker had for his schooling, or the one Retcher had for gathering other Lost Boys and adding them to the tribe. Retcher had rescued baby Tinker from the streets of Nowhere Special and welcomed him into the Goblin fold. He had been the one to urge Tinker to go away to Harmswood. What on earth was he doing here? After a few heartbeats, Tinker focused on what the tiny, wide-eyed Snot carried on his oversized green hands. No, 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 no way. This was not happening. Not today, not ever, not here, not in front of... What is that thing? He heard Natalie whisper. That thing was an enormous, gaudy, borderline lethal construction of tin garbage, an eyesore reserved for only one honor. It's a ceremonial headdress given to the heir to the throne of the Goblin King, Tinker said softly. But that's not me, he screamed inside his brain. This is not supposed to happen to me. Holy! Hubble clamped his own hand over his mouth before a curse escaped his lips. Sam let out a low whistle. Natalie pulled her phone out in her pocket and started to record. Tinker scanned the coffee shop. Everyone was staring at him now, including Bellamy. Retcher stood as tall as his crooked frame allowed. His stringy black hair fell into his eyes, covering almost all of his face, except his bulbous, warty nose. The twins flanked him proudly. Snot predictably sniffled. Unable to move his hands without dropping the headdress, he casually wiped his nose on the pillow where it sat.
Ranulph Tinkerton, Retcher announced, we bestow upon you the mantle of majesty.
The monstrosity should have been called the mantle of misfortune. Bits had been added to the headdress over the years, a spoon here, a button there, a bottle cap or two, all nestled among dozens of coin-sized pieces of hammered tin. It did not sparkle in the light like dwarven silver might have, nor did the pieces tinkle magically as Retcher moved to place it over Tinker's head and shoulders. Instead, it clattered.
Henceforth you will be known as the Goblin Prince, heir apparent to the throne of the Goblin King.
Tinker opened his mouth and then closed it again. He wasn't sure what to say. If anything, it wasn't like he'd ever rehearsed the ceremony because it wasn't supposed to happen to him. The headdress smelled like iron and old feet. It had knocked Tinker's glasses off kilter, so he shifted it enough to straighten them. Several bits of tin fell to the floor. Hubble, dramatic Hubble, go bold, kobold, and the best friend a guy could ever have, stood on top of his chair, maximizing his height. He threw his gray arms wide and, in his best dungeon master voice, announced to the coffee shop, "Welcome to Nocturne Falls, everyone!" At that, the confused occupants of the hallowed bean began to applaud and cheer. Sam and Natalie loudest of all. Thanks to Hubble's declaration, all the tourists in the bean would now just write this off as one more impromptu performance, staged for their benefit. Out of the corner of his eye, Tinker saw Bellamy clapping too, her rainbow-streaked curls bouncing cheerfully. The smile plastered to her face was both sweet and mystified. Tinker closed his eyes and wished with all his might that the earth would open up and swallow him in the malevolent mantle right now. Oh yeah, it was official. Worst day ever.
Woo!